The professionals who have the most authority in their market, they're not really the ones who talk about themselves the most. In fact, they're the ones who help the most. They're the ones who consistently share useful insight, who explain things clearly, who make it easier for someone else to think, decide, or move forward. And they're okay with sharing their opinions in knowing that it could ruffle a few feathers. That is thought leadership. And they do it generously without needing to be asked and without making it about them every time. I'm Sylvia Garibaldi, founder and CEO of a well-established marketing training and done-for-you services company, tailored specifically for the modern legal and financial professional worldwide. While it's taken some trial and error to figure out which methods get the best results for professionals who are looking to grow their practices, fast forward to today, my team and I have nailed down and perfected a process that has helped so many of our clients consistently achieve outstanding results and create a legacy for their practices. I created the Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast to give you simple, actionable, non-salesy, and results-driven marketing to grow your legal or financial practice like so many of our clients have. If you're a lawyer, mediator, financial, or divorce professional who is looking to become highly visible and wants to create a practice that makes an impact, then you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 119 of the Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast. I'm your host, Sylvia Garibaldi, and this is the show where we talk about growing your legal, mediation, and divorce practice in ways that feel good, not pushy sales tactics, no gimmicks, and just real strategies that we know work. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you, and I appreciate you. So I have a question for you. Have you ever held back from sharing something that you know would help your clients because you didn't want it to come across the wrong way? And not because you didn't have anything to say, but because you didn't want to sound self-promotional or like you were trying too hard. I hear this all the time from lawyers, mediators, and other trust-based professionals. And they're not avoiding marketing because they don't believe in it. They're avoiding it because they don't want to become the kind of person that maybe they won't respect, or the kind that talks about themselves, posts for attention, or shares things that don't feel real. So instead, they stay quiet. And I think the problem is when you stay quiet, the right people don't find you. And so in this episode, I want to give you a much clearer way to think about this because there is a real difference between sharing your expertise in a way that builds trust and promoting yourself in a way that actually turns people away. And once you understand that difference, marketing starts to feel a lot more natural and a lot more effective. So let's take a minute and start by cleaning up a term that gets thrown around a lot because I think it's part of the confusion, and that is thought leadership. Thought leadership really has become one of those phrases that people hear all the time, but don't know what it actually means anymore. So let's take this back a bit. At its core, thought leadership is pretty simple. It's about sharing a perspective that helps people think differently, make a better decision, or solve a real problem that they're dealing with. That's it. You don't need a big platform. You don't need a book. You don't need a podcast. You don't need a following. You just need something useful to say that comes from your real experience. Now, let's contrast that with what self-promotion actually is. Self-promotion puts you at the center. So the underlying message is, hey, look at me. And to be clear, that's not always a bad thing. There are moments where it makes sense to share wins, results, and milestones. But when everything that you share is centered on you, or when something is positioned as helpful, but in fact it really just is about highlighting yourself, then people can sense that. And when they feel it, they will disengage. They'll scroll past, they'll stop listening, they'll stop reading. So here's a simple way, I think, to tell the difference. Ask yourself, who is the hero in what I'm sharing? So in thought leadership, the person reading or listening, that's the hero. They are the one trying to solve a problem or make a decision. So your role is the guide. You bring the insight, the perspective, the experience that helps them move forward. So in self promotion, you are the hero. See the difference? So you are the focus, you are the story. And as I said, both have a place, but only one consistently builds trust. And that's the one where the other person sees themselves in what you're actually saying. Now, there is a middle ground here, and that's pretty important. So, things like case studies, testimonials, credentials, and results, they don't sit neatly in one category. They're not pure thought leadership, but they're not empty self promotion either. So, they sit in what I call the gray zone. The difference comes down to how you frame them, what you choose to emphasize, and why you're sharing them in the first place. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But before we move on, I want you to pause and think about your own content, maybe your last presentation, a social media post, and think about the last thing that you shared and ask yourself one question. Who was the hero in that piece? Now, I want to give you something more practical that you can actually use. And so here are 5 simple tests that you can run anything through before you share it, before you publish it, and before you actually send it out. So if you're unsure whether something is thought leadership or self promotion, I think this is a good guide that you can follow. So let's go through them one by one. So, test number 1 is the so what test. So, after someone reads what you wrote or listened to a podcast episode, or perhaps they watched a video, is it immediately clear what they should think, feel, or do differently? So, in other words, does it change something for them? If the answer is yes, then you're in thought leadership. If the only takeaway is, wow, this person's pretty impressive, then you're definitely in self promotion mode. Okay. So, for example, saying, I've handled hundreds of mediation cases, that may sound strong, but the so what part is missing from that. So, compare it to this. After handling hundreds of mediation cases, here's the one mistake I see clients make over and over again, and here's how to avoid it. Now, that's really a takeaway. Okay, so think about that and use the so what test. The second test is what I call the gratitude test. Would someone actually want to thank you for what you just shared? Not compliment you, but thank you because it's made a real difference to them. So, great post or congratulations is one type of response. But what I'm really looking for is, did this help me? Or I really needed to hear this today. That's something else entirely. And that's when you know that it's landed. And that is thought leadership. Test number 3 is the context test. Are you sharing a result or a credential in service of a lesson? Or are you just stating it on its own? So, for example, we settled a complex custody case. That's a statement. It says something about you for sure, but it doesn't give me anything that I can use. Now, compare it to this. We recently settled a complex custody case, and here's what actually made the difference in getting it resolved. And then you continue on to explain what that is. So, same experience, different framing, one informs and the other serves. Test number 4 is the discomfort test. So, does what you're sharing take a position? Does it say something that not everyone would agree with? Because real thought leadership does have a point of view, and it's willing to say, hey, this is what I see, or this is what I believe works, even if it's not universally accepted. So, self promotion, on the other hand, is almost always safe. No one argues that you won a trophy, or no one argues that you won the best award. So, that's important to make that distinction. Test number 5 is what I call the serve first test. So, before you hit publish, ask yourself a very simple question. Am I giving something here, or am I asking for something? Because attention is what you're asking for. But a useful idea, something that helps someone move forward, that's what you're giving. And over time, the more that you consistently give, the more people will start to trust you. Okay. So take our Serve First, Sell Later marketing podcast. Same idea. I hope you see that we're adding value here and we are giving you content that helps you change the direction of your practice. So if you take anything from this episode, take these 5 tests, run your next piece of content through them. And please don't overcomplicate this. You just need to make sure that what you're sharing actually does something for the person on the other side. And I encourage you to just take action and avoid analysis paralysis. Okay. This is very common. We see that a lot with professionals that we work with. They're stuck, they stop moving, they stop taking action that will move the dial in their practice. So I encourage you to think about using this 5 test process and let me know how you make out. I'd love to hear it. All right. So if you're listening to this and thinking, this makes sense, but I'm not sure how to translate it into a system that actually works for my practice, that's exactly where we support our clients at SG and Associates. We work with lawyers, mediators, and other trust based professionals to design marketing systems that are realistic, sustainable, and aligned with how their practice actually operates, not systems that rely on constant posting or nonstop effort. And that usually means clarifying where your visibility should live, how to stay consistently connected with referral partners, and how to reinforce your authority without adding more to your plate. If that would be helpful, you can book a free strategy call with me. We'll look at what you're already doing, identify what can be stabilized or simplified, and map out a clearer path forward. You can find the link in the show notes. Now, let's come back to that gray area that I was referring to, because this is where most professionals can get stuck. You don't want to sound self promotional, so you avoid talking about your entire experience altogether. But here's the problem with that: you can't be invisible. Your clients need to know that you've done this before. They need to know that other people trust you. They need to know that you have real, relevant experience in these situations that they're currently facing. So when you avoid sharing results or outcomes completely, it's not humility. It actually leaves your ideal client without the proof that they need to choose you. And I see this a lot with the professionals that I work with. A workplace mediator, for example, might hesitate to talk about the fact that they've helped leadership teams navigate high conflict situations because they don't want to sound like they're bragging. Or a family law mediator might avoid mentioning the number of cases that they've resolved, even though that experience is exactly what a potential client is looking for. So I think the goal here isn't to remove those things, it's to frame them differently. And the shift is pretty simple, but it's powerful. Always lead with the client first, not yourself. So instead of saying, I helped a couple reach a parenting agreement in 2 sessions, you can say something like, here's what made the difference when a couple came into mediation completely exhausted and mistrustful and were still able to reach parenting agreement. Same experience, but now the focus isn't on what the client is going through and what actually helped. A workplace mediator could do the same thing. So instead of saying, I've worked with leadership teams to resolve conflict, you might say, here's what I've seen happen when leadership teams avoid addressing conflict early, and what changes when they finally deal with it directly. Now we're pulling the listener into a situation that they recognize. The same applies to credentials. There's nothing wrong with experience. In fact, it does matter, but it needs to be in service of something. So saying something like, I've been mediating for 15 years, on its own is great, but it really doesn't do much. Instead, if you say, after 15 years of mediating workplace conflicts, here's what I've learned about what people actually need in the first conversation. And now your experience becomes the context and it supports the insight instead of being the entire message. The next thing I want to talk about is testimonials and social proof. So these are pretty powerful, but again, it comes down to what you highlight. So if a testimonial says, she's amazing, highly recommend, that's nice, but it doesn't teach anything. So compare it to a client saying, I came into a mediation thinking that this would turn into a fight, but I left with a clear agreement and a much better understanding of how to move forward. Now, this tells a story, right? And you can guide your clients into what type of testimonial that you're looking for. So if they value your work, they know what they're going to talk about, but give them the powerful questions to ask. So direct them around, what was the problem? What did you help them with that problem? What was the pre and post situation for them? Getting them to think in that structure allows you to get testimonials that can deliver more value to the people reading it. So one thing that we do with our clients when we write social for them is the testimonial component. So we will ask them, hey, if you've got some testimonials, pass them along because we're going to build whatever those testimonials are into a powerful message for you. And that's exactly what we do. So clients will come to us with testimonials, and we will create social media for them that highlights the testimonial, like the most valid or the most important point about it. And then the lesson that's in there for the reader. Because at the end of the day, none of us want to be boastful about, oh, I'm really great at this. You want to say, yes, I'm really good at this, but here's the lesson. Here's the golden nugget. Here's what you can take away from this. All of a sudden, what seems like a boastful message now becomes a powerful learning lesson. And the same idea applies to when you're celebrating milestones. There's nothing wrong with sharing that you hit episode 100 of your podcast, or that you won an award, or that you were recognized in your field. These are important moments. And in fact, just to give you an example, when we hit 100 episodes, we didn't say, hey, just look at us, we're celebrating 100 episodes. I mean, we're proud that we have created 100 plus episodes. And we made sure we talked about that. My team made sure that we talked about that in the social media. But we took it a step further. We also discussed what are the things that I learned from my listeners in doing 100 podcast episodes. So see how we turn that around with value, because it's not about me or the podcast. It's about what I can deliver for you, the listener. Okay, I hope that's resonating. So that's another way that you can turn around either milestones of episodes or awards or accolades that you've won. Yes, celebrate them, talk about them, but then talk about the lesson that you've learned from that, because that's very powerful and very humbling for people to read or listen to. So I highly encourage you to think about how you can use any of those accolades. Here's a quick example. So let's say, you've won this award as a mediator. You can say something like, acknowledge the award and say that you're very proud. But then you go into saying something like, after years of working on these complex family cases, here's what I've learned about why some agreements last and why others fall apart. Just a quick example, right? But we're taking that award or that accolade, and then we're turning it into a lesson. So now the milestone becomes a doorway into insight. And this is the shift. You don't have to choose between being visible and being genuine. You just need to make sure that when you share your experience, it's in service of the person on the other side. And when you do this, that's what moves it out of self-promotion and into something that actually builds trust. So let's bring this into something that you can actually do starting right away. So here's what I want you to think about. The first step I'd like you to engage in is to audit something that you've recently shared. Okay, so go back to one post, one article, an email, a presentation, something from last month, and then run it through the 5 tests that we've just talked about. So that is the so what test, the gratitude test, the context test, the discomfort test, and the serve first test. And don't judge yourself and don't pick it apart. Just understand your default, because what most professionals realize when they do this is that they tend to lean towards self-promotion, not because of ego, but because they're not always sure what else to share. And this is just about awareness. And once you see the pattern, you can start to shift it. Okay, so step number 2 is to create what I call, I wish my clients knew this type of list. So sit down and write down 5 things that you genuinely wish every potential client understood before they ever came to speak with you. So if you're a workplace mediator, it could be, I wish leadership teams understood what unresolved conflict is actually costing them before it escalates. Or if you're a lawyer, it might be, I wish clients understood how decisions made early on really can impact things later down the road. These are not promotional ideas. These are service-based insights. And those 5 points that you write down, those are your next 5 pieces of content. Because when you speak to what your clients are already struggling to understand, you naturally attract the ones who are ready for your help. Step number 3 is simple, but this is where most people hesitate. Just pick one platform and publish something this week. Not next week, not when you have more time, not when it feels more polished, just this week. One thing, it doesn't have to be long and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be useful to one person. So this is all about taking action. And I have to say, I was on a call recently with a prospect, and it was very clear that he was intent on following all the right steps and taking his time to make sure he was doing it right. There's nothing wrong with that. But something that I do see happen with a lot of professionals is what I call analysis paralysis. Looking for perfection, wanting to make it absolutely perfect before they launch. Now, that is a tricky place to be because if you get stuck in analysis paralysis, it will take you much longer to achieve your goal. Okay. And so with this prospect, I was very direct and I said, if there's any piece of advice I could leave you with, this is it. Please take action no matter what it is, but take action to build momentum. Because one of the things I do see is that people that are ready to launch are stuck in analysis paralysis and they take way too much time to make that first step. And then when they take that first step, they're not even consistent. They just take that step and then disappear for a little bit and then come back in again. So, really important message to just take action and do it today. That is the key thing. And as I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be useful to one person. And that's really the job. And if you do that consistently, even at a very simple level, you're going to start to see a shift in how people respond to you, how they engage with you, and how they start to see you in your space. And this is really how it all starts. So let's land this on one simple idea. The professionals who have the most authority in their market, they're not really the ones who talk about themselves the most. In fact, they're the ones who help the most. They're the ones who consistently share useful insight, who explain things clearly, who make it easier for someone else to think, decide, or move forward. And they're okay with sharing their opinions in knowing that it could ruffle a few feathers. That is thought leadership. And they do it generously without needing to be asked and without making it about them every time. And that's what really builds trust, and it builds trust quickly. And that's what makes someone come to mind, especially when the right opportunity shows up. And of course, that is what thought leadership is actually doing. And it's available to every single one of you listening here today. I'm rooting for you. And so if this episode resonated with you, I want you to do just one simple thing. Think of a colleague, someone you know that's holding back or overthinking or unsure what to share, and send this to them. Because that in itself is an act of thought leadership. You're passing along something useful to someone who needs it. And if you're listening to this and thinking, well, I get this, but I'm still not sure what this looks like for me, then let's figure that out together. You can book a free strategy call with me. The link is in the show notes. We'll look at your practice, your audience, and what you already know, and then map out what thought leadership could look like for you in a way that feels natural and works for you. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes packed with actionable strategies to grow your practice. See you in the next episode.